On the third week of Russia's aggression in Ukraine, the peace resolution hasn't come yet to end these two countries' conflict. We'll talk more about the Russia and Ukraine conflict into war from the European Union's point of view. Joining us today, European Union Ambassador to Indonesia, His Excellency Vincent Piket. Ambassador Piket, thank you so much for your time to join this special interview with Kompas TV.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Pleasure to be with you.
Glad to be with you too. My first question is, the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, at the beginning of Russia's special military operation, asked the European Union and NATO for military assistance in dealing with Russian aggression. From the European Union's perspective, why the military aids were arms and funding instead of troops or direct military intervention as expected by the President of Ukraine?
Well, I understand very well that the European Union is not, by its origin, a military organization. We have developed over the past 2 decades a defense profile and capability, but that is limited to 2 things essentially. First, the defense of our own territory, support to member states in defending and dealing with security issues on the own territory, and secondly, peace and peacekeeping missions abroad, and these are predominantly handled under mandates from the United Nations Security Council. So that's a bit of a long answer to say that in the case of Ukraine, we haven't come that far. And so we have here a request that we understand, coming from President Zelenskyy, we understand, but the specific answer from the EU side is what we, not armies and soldiers, but a lot of support in terms of weaponry and for military aid for the Ukrainian army. €500 million worth of goods provided by member states with financial support from the EU budget. Also, a number of individual member states have granted support to the military, and as on the side of the EU funded mechanism. Of our other support for Ukraine has very much been on the political and the diplomatic level. I particularly mention the vote in the United Nations General Assembly about 10 days ago, in which 141 countries from the UN membership supported a resolution that condemns the Russian invasion into Ukraine, a sovereign country, an invasion that was unprovoked and is utterly illegal in the international legal order. And so 141 countries supported that, and that, I think, gives you a very clear and simple objective picture of how the world thinks about this Russian action. Politics is not enough, of course. We need also other forms of support, and the EU has done that also financially. Last week, financial aid, 1.2 billion euros, basically for the government of Ukraine to help them keep the government running, pay the salaries, social support for the citizens, etc. And the last big component is humanitarian. Unfortunately, the war sees many civilian casualties in 2 ways: deaths, and secondly, in the terms of displaced people who seek their refuge outside Ukraine. And of course, the EU is the next door neighbor. And we have seen 2.2 million Ukrainian citizens coming to the European Union in the past 2 weeks. That's massive. The EU has opened its borders for the Ukrainian refugees. We've said anybody who flees the war is welcome to stay with us for a year initially. Hope it won't be necessary longer. They can work, they can go to school, and they will get some cash to help the daily needs. And so that's the offer of the EU. And that's also the offer of member states, governmental level, tremendous support and contribution from countries like Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, and in receiving the refugees on their territory and giving them shelter. Lastly, citizen support. It's amazing, really, to see what individual citizens are bringing to this by accommodating refugees in their own homes, by financial assistance through pool funding, etc., and by transporting them from the border of Ukraine to safe places inside the EU. So enormous support there from the EU side. How long will this last? That is, of course, the big question. The humanitarian crisis will last as long as the conflict, the warfaring continues. Unfortunately, we see no abatement in that. The Russian military keep on bombarding cities, towns, civilian infrastructure, schools, hospitals, apartment buildings, shops, the local shops destroyed, livelihoods destroyed, cities totally locked up in siege by the military, thousands of people trapped in shelters, in cellars, in subways, etc. So that is the reality that we see right now, with humanitarian needs rising very, very, very high at the moment.
Your Excellency, as you said, and the United Nations also mentioned that at least 2.7 million people have fled from Ukraine. Will the European Union countries accommodate all, and what is the maximum estimated number that can be accommodated?
Well, we will do everything that is needed. That's the bottom line. We have opened, as I said, we have opened our borders for the Ukrainian refugees. There is no ceiling set. In fact, the ceiling is set by President Putin in Moscow. As long as he continues the fighting and the shelling, the numbers of refugees will go up. And the EU has the capability to shelter many refugees. We have budget, of course, on the one hand, and we have a system for sharing the burden of accommodating the refugees amongst all 27 member states. So the neighbor countries of Ukraine will be the first recipients, of course, but then there will be a system of transporting refugees to other member states as well.
Ambassador Piket, the leaders of the European Union countries rejected the pressure and desire of Ukraine to be accepted as a member of the EU in the near future. Actually, whether the opportunity to be the member for Ukraine is still open or not, if there is still any chance, what the conditions that must be fulfilled?
The door is very much open for Ukraine. Ukraine has a European destiny. That is what the EU heads of state and heads of government said, even as recently as last Friday when they met in near Paris. So the door is open. We invited Ukraine to officially submit the membership application. Ukraine did so. So now is the next step starting, and now here there's a normal procedure, and of course that we have for that sort of application. But we have here an unprecedented situation, an acute need to bring a perspective to Ukraine, to bring stability to the country and security to the country. And Ukrainian security is also our security, as the present context shows so clearly. So the EU leaders have confirmed their openness to Ukraine's membership. We now need to find creative ways to make this possible in very difficult circumstances. And again, of course, the crunch question will be, when will the fighting stop? When will the Russian invasion stop? When will Russia withdraw its troops and observe completely a ceasefire, as the UN General Assembly resolution called for?
Talking about the situation, how does the EU react with the racism perpetrated to non-Ukrainian or non-white refugees? This has been covered by media. One of them is BBC from a country on the Ukrainian border.
Our borders are open to anybody seeking refuge with the EU from Ukraine, regardless of the ethnicity or the color of the skin or the religion or what have you. Our borders are open for everybody, and so there's no distinction made there whatsoever.
Russia confirms that they do not want war, but the aggression against Ukraine occurred because of the dead end of 80 diplomatic ways of conflict resolution in Lugansk and Donetsk. Also, the threats received by Russians living in Ukraine in ideological and physical threats. So how does the European Union respond to this statement from Russia?
Well, our response is very clear and simple, that the Russian argument, the justification for this war, that there is supposedly a genocide happening in Donetsk and Luhansk, and mass-scale killings, that Russian justification is a pure fantasy, a fabrication, a piece of disinformation. Over the past, clear that the situation in those two provinces it has been tense ever since they developed the separatist movement, and with military backing from Russia. So there's no two ways about that. But there have been missions by the Council of Europe and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, who have analyzed the Russian claims, done reports about it, and these reports are very, very clearly saying that there is no such thing as mass-scale killings, or let alone genocide happenings. In other words, we are here talking about disinformation. The good thing is, of a recent vote, also at the UN level, in the Human Rights Council, that council adopted a resolution the other day, more focusing on the human rights aspects of the invasion, and that resolution voted by a very, very large majority of the members of that council. That resolution will set up a commission of investigation, of inquiry, that is to look at specifically these claims and other claims, of genocide and persecution and so on. So we hope very much that the Russian authorities will collaborate with that investigation in order to get an objective and independent assessment.
Also about the background, even though Ukraine was finally unable to join NATO, but NATO's expansion efforts to the east were considered by Russia as a red line of security threats in Russia's yard. According to the European Union, is that reason enough to start the aggression?
First of all, the EU is not the same as NATO. You know that, but I just want to make that clear. Many of our member states are members of NATO, but not everybody. We have our own identity. But answering to your specific question, any such allegation, of course, cannot be a ground for warfare, cannot be a justification for an invasion, cannot be a legitimation of widespread destruction and death-mongering amongst the civilian population. There's no two ways about it. There is still disputes about whether at all this so-called promise for NATO membership for Ukraine was made at all. Even President Gorbachev, who was in those talks, says never was this topic ever discussed. But leaving that aside, there is, from our point of view, in the case of a security concern, there's only one way to go forward, and that is diplomacy, negotiation. And if you can't sort it out with your bilateral other side, then you bring in others who can credibly help mediate solutions where the two opposing parties are unable to find a solution. So that is the way forward, not war. Let me maybe one sidestep or going, on the European continent, we've had terrible wars in the past century. The latest, World War II, millions and millions of people killed in the western part of Europe, also in Russia, by the way, and that is an experience that the European Union countries had successfully put behind us. Thanks to the integration that the EU brought, the stability, the economic context, the people-to-people context, and all the other mechanisms whereby we thought we had totally ruled out armed conflict from our continent. Clearly, we were wrong in our assessment, in the sense that Russia, despite all the lessons of the past, went down the road of warfare once on the European continent once again. And that is, of course, a very profoundly disturbing observation, so profound that it will necessitate that the EU will think very hard about our future security policy, about how we deal with our new risks, even threats. And so you will have the EU leaders last Friday discuss this as well. And today, defense ministers are meeting, and so there's a whole new dialogue and framework needed to face up to what we are facing now.
Speaking about the Russia-Ukraine war recently has also expanded into the energy war. How is the EU strategy to prevent and deal with the energy crisis?
You're right. We are too dependent on Russia. Have been too dependent on Russian supplies of gas and oil. It's the share of Russian products is high as an average, but in some member states it's even higher. The plan now approved by our leaders last Friday is to do two things. First of all, in the very short term, make sure that we stock up our reserves for the next European winter, which is somewhere November, December of this year. Make sure that we are prepared for whatever may happen. Secondly, that we fundamentally and accelerate our energy mix, our supply, that we work on our diversification of supply, that we push the energy efficiency agenda, which we had already, that we push that forward very, very fast, and also that we look at renewables with a new urgency. The current reality shows that that's needed. The ideas, plans, and measures were already in motion before the crisis, but now obviously we've got to move a lot faster.
Talking about the sanctions to Russia, Russia said that economic sanctions against Russia from the United States, European Union, UK, and many other countries as hysterical or excessive reaction, while sanctions are not given to countries involved in invasions in other countries such as the Middle East. How does the European Union see this?
Well, each crisis needs to be looked at on its own. Comparisons with other crises are extremely difficult. Circumstances are different, etc. So no easy comparison. Secondly, there's nothing as hysterical about what we're doing. Nothing at all. We are reacting to a very, very profoundly disturbing reality of war in our neighborhood, a war that against a sovereign country whose borders, by the way, had been recognized by Russia at a time when Ukraine became independent. So that is a profoundly disturbing reality and a dangerous one for Ukraine, but for the wider European security, including the European Union. So we have to go deal with that. We will have to, and our objective is, rather than sending armies, is to incapacitate the capability of Russian warfare by sanctions. The sanctions that the EU have adopted are unprecedented in terms of their scale and the depth, and we see that they work. It's not only our sanctions, by the way. 40 other countries, including from Asia, have also put sanctions in place. We see they work. The Russian economy is in severe trouble. The ruble has lost 50% of its value. Stock exchange is closed. The Russian debt is has been classified as by the credit rating agencies as junk debt, so unsellable. We have locked out banks, state-linked or Kremlin-linked banks and companies from the SWIFT financial transfer system, so the companies are leaving Russia. There's no sensible investor that will, at the present moment, invest in Russia any longer. So I think we are on the track to doing exactly what we want to do, and that is cut the sources of financing of this conflict. It may take some more days for this to happen, but we know that the pressure is mounting, and that this will cause the Russian authorities to reflect on a peaceful solution to the war that they've caused.
And the last question from me. Until now, there has been no peace agreement yet. between Russia and Ukraine. According to the European Union, what is the best solution or the best way to overcome this conflict quickly?
Well, our way is the UN way, and that is the unconditional withdrawal by Russia of the forces they have sent into Ukraine, the full respect of the ceasefire, the full respect of the humanitarian corridors, whereby Ukrainians can leave the country where they are unable to live at present, and the creation of a climate in which, or the conditions in which, a constructive negotiation can happen about a solution to the conflict. This has to be a Russian-Ukrainian negotiation, of course, with support of the international community where that is needed. The UN, others need to work on this as well. But that is for us the only way. So withdrawal of troops, ceasefire, and respect for the humanitarian interests.
Really hope that the war is going to be ended soon, thus there will be no more casualties in this conflict. European Union Ambassador to Indonesia, His Excellency Vincent Piket. Ambassador Piket, thank you so much for your willingness to join the special interview with Kompas TV.
Sama-sama, thank you very much indeed.
Terima kasih.